This video is sponsored by Tokyo Treats and Sakura Co. Wait till the end to see authentic Japanese snacks. Hey guys, what is up? It is me, Rosmo. I know it's a little bit early for some spooky vibes, but I thought I'd give this a little watch and see what kind of story it is, because I've only seen this movie once in HBO while flipping channels as a kid, and I didn't remember much. And so we're back at it again with Ever Heard of Paranorman. Paranorman is a 2012 stop-motion dark fantasy comedy horror film that was directed by Sam Fell and Chris Butler, and written by Chris Butler. It was animated by Laika, a studio you might be familiar with if you like stop-motion animation, because they have works such as Coraline and Kubo and the Two Strings. If you ever want to watch this movie, I strongly recommend you give the first few minutes a watch, because this movie has such a strong opening sequence. It starts off with a corny zombie movie with bad production, which I thought was really funny, with the boom mic being swatted away and the actress screaming for a while only to get tired, look at the camera, and see it's still filming and then screams again. And then we see Norman, our main character, talking to his grandmother, who's asking about zombies, and as he takes out the trash, she asks him to tell Norman's dad to turn up the thermostat because her feet is freezing. Norman goes out but then hesitantly goes back in to tell his dad to turn up the thermostat for his grandmother, and, let me just show you what happens next.
Oh. Hey, Dad? Grandma says, can you turn up the heating? Her feet are cold.
Now, Perry?
How many times do we have to go through this, son? Your grandmother is dead!
They talk about Norman's uncle, which his parents don't seem to like, but he sure seems to take a liking to Norman, as it cuts to an unknown person who we can assume is his Uncle Pendergast, with pictures and pictures of Norman. It's kinda creepy out of context. Well, in context, it's still creepy. Then we get this sequence of Norman going to school, talking to himself. And I thought he was practicing how to make friends and what he's going to say to the new kids at school. But then people started staring at him, and he starts talking to a dead raccoon. And then from the empty streets, we shift to see what Norman sees. And it's a lively street with a lot of deceased people. Never mind how ironic that sounds. The opening sequence really got me hooked with the pacing. The cinematography and the music, it was all great. The simple, sweet music at the empty neighborhood suddenly shifted to a lively, melancholy melody as we see all the dead people Norman happily greets on his way to school.
How you doing? Hi, Mrs. Hardman. You look nice today. I like what you've done with your hair.
Does anyone smell burning?
Hey!
This video will contain spoilers of the movie, so be sure to give it a watch if you want just a little bit of shock value. But keep in mind, it does have some visuals that might make some people feel uncomfortable because they do tackle death and such, so let that be a warning. Right off the bat, they show you what you would expect from this movie because they do not hold off on some things. Like how when Norman was asked what he was watching, he replied, sex and violence, or as Norman walks through the streets, you can see the dead people and how they died, along with a billboard of a witch with a not-so-family-friendly necktie, if you catch my drift. They show how Norman lives in school as an outcast because of his ability to see ghosts and their inability to comprehend his point of view. And it doesn't help the fact that Norman also gets flashes of frightening vision that any 11-year-old would be absolutely shocked. If I was that 11-year-old and I saw that happening, I would piss my pants, no question. This is scary for a kid. Actually, even as an adult, I'd be terrified if I saw the walls and ceilings deteriorating, to be honest. Then we meet this raggedy, bearded guy who just emits stranger danger. But it turns out that it's his uncle that his parents don't want him to talk to. He says that he can see things Norman sees and that he leaves because he was threatened by Neil with the spicy hummus. Don't ask me why. If a child came up to me and threatened to hit me, I'd leave too. I don't want to throw hands against babies. So Neil plays with Norman and believes him when he says he can see the dead and asks if he can see his dead dog, which he could. Partially. And we get this wholesome interaction of Neil really trying to get along with Norman. Later that night, we get to see Norman in the play about the history of the town, which he ends up ruining because he gets dragged back into his vision. But this time, it gets worse since strange men chase him in a forest and call him a witch. So he goes home as his father goes on an angry rant, and we watch a harsh scene of Norman and his father's exchange to one another.
I wish everyone could see what I see and ask to be born this way.
Funny. Neither did we.
I can understand both sides since his father does seem very supportive of Norman in his play, but can't understand his son, and it scares him, and Norman on the other hand being misunderstood. This was explained to him by his mother, who is very understanding of him, but also doesn't believe that he sees the dead. The next day he sees a vision of his uncle, who is now dead, telling him to continue his duty to read a book in a grave of the witch of the town to stop the witch's curse before sunset. So he does that after he pries the book from his uncle's cold dead hands, which is a sequence a little too slapstick and dragged on for my taste, but it's still good. He goes on to the graveyard, reads the book, which ended up being the story Sleeping Beauty, but it doesn't work, so the witch's curse was not broken, and the dead suddenly comes back to life, so Norman had to run and hide. Oh, also his bully is with him since he wanted to chase Norman and ruin his day again? I don't know. This dude is not important to the plot, but he's here. Courtney asks Neil if he knows where her little brother is, but ends up simping to the older brother asking for their help, in which they agreed and they found Norman with the bully. And they get into this chase scene with zombies that in my opinion dragged a little too long, but I can look past that. Norman tries to find the actual grave of the witch to read the book and stop the curse. So they call a friend, and their friend says that the graveyard that they went to was not the correct grave because she said, and I quote this from the movie, she said, people guilty of witchcraft weren't considered people anymore. That was a little bit of a throwaway line, but putting that into context of what the witch has gone through, that's harsh. Anyway, the zombies get to town and the people are going nuts even though the zombies did nothing at all. While the town is in chaos, Norman and the gang go to the library where they found nothing about where the witch is buried. Courtney tells Norman to give up since obviously their plan isn't working, and Norman refuses and pushes them away, saying he didn't ask for their help. Not the first time this happened since he did kind of push Neil away in the earlier scenes of him inviting Norman to play hockey. With no choice, Norman tries to read the book again to the witch, but she only laughs in her weird green cloud form. He asks why she was doing all of this, and then we shift to this trial session of someone being accused of a witch, with 6 other people glaring at Norman, telling him that he's going to be killed because of the accusations of the 6 people. And then it happens. The revelation that shook me. Just behind Norman, you can hear a voice of someone crying. Norman looks behind, and it was a little girl. I don't know if you're getting this. These 6 men took a child, cuffed her, dragged her to court, and told her that they were going to kill her because she was speaking to the dead. And this is hard for Norman to watch since he was always subjected to his own witch burning. Not literally, and not as harsh as the witches, but still. The people close in and the girl starts sparking lightning, and then it fades to white, where the zombies ask Norman to help them, since he can speak to the dead, and that they're sorry for what they did, saying,
I believed we were doing what was right. I was wrong. Now this is our punishment.
Norman escorts the zombies out and tries to explain to the crowd what needs to be done, and that the zombies won't hurt them, but nobody listens as Norman kept talking. Here comes my favorite part of the movie. Aside from the amazing opening sequence, of course, Courtney suddenly goes up at front, shuts the crowd up, holds hands, and also this happened.
Hand, Alvin, my hand.
I found that funny because I didn't expect it. So Norman talks about how these stupid zombies did something horrible because they were scared, and that's what's happening now. Oh, look at that, gang. What a coinky-dink. Norman got separated with his family, and the witch did not make it easy for Norman to approach her. When Norman got remotely close, the witch gave him some little zappy zaps. Also, her face of disbelief in this shot was great. I feel like if I saw this as a kid, I would be scared. Norman pulls out his Talk No Jutsu trap card on the witch, which now we know is named Agatha, and then he says this.
You're just like them, Agatha!
No, I'm not.
You're a bully!
No, I'm not.
Which, hold on. Norman, first of all, no. Norman then asks Agatha if someone loved her in life, and they get transported to the forest, and Agatha, also known as Aggie, remembered her mother that loved her and read stories that had happy endings to her under the tree. Aggie then chose to sleep under the same tree she and her mother used to spend time together. Norman goes back to town and sees the current state of things, Alvin lying, Courtney hitting on Mitch to go to the movies, which Mitch replies with the famous Tumblr post.
That sounds great, Kathy. You know, you're gonna love my boyfriend. He's like a total chick flick nut.
which is a great punchline to build up of Courtney being so thirsty this whole movie about Mitch, but then he ends up being gay. Now this isn't played for the purpose of a joke. Co-director Chris Butler explicitly connects it to the message of the movie, saying, if we're saying to anyone watching this movie, don't judge other people, then we got to have strength in our conviction. The end. All in all, I really do like the story and the message they chose for it. It's easy to exclude someone we find rude, and especially online when they find a odd one or cringy one, and they just make fun of the people like that. The message they chose is pretty relevant even for today. I like the parallel of the metaphorical witch hunt where people find the person they find weird and exclude them, and or target them for bullying, which for Maggie's case is the literal sense. All of them ganged up on this little girl and decided to kill her, which, speaking of Aggie's death, it wasn't explicitly mentioned how she died. We just know that the townspeople killed her and that her death became a myth to the town, hence why they make plays and events around it. And I looked it up and I found out how she actually died. And they clue us in on the details early on in the first part of the movie. Norman was walking to school because he was late talking to dead people he sees. Then we see a billboard of a witch with a noose on her neck. And I thought this was just the movie saying they're not shying away from this imagery or not censoring things like it, but it is in fact Aggie. This is how she died. I'm not even messing around. She got chased in the forest by adults, accused and judged, sentenced to death, and was hanged. Now I already feel so bad for Aggie and hate the zombies for it. And you know what? I'm gonna say it. I don't mind if the curse stayed with them, because honestly, what's the worst that's happening to them? They become zombies sometimes in a year? Oh, how horrible. I really feel bad for Aggie, man. I'm glad at the end of the movie, Norman helped her not to think about the bad people and remember the person that loved her, which was her mother. Aggie really isn't evil. When she remembered who she was instead of just her anger to the townspeople, she actually doesn't want to be that kind of person. You see that Aggie is actually sweet because the devil is in the details. As soon as she starts getting angry, she zapped a butterfly and burned it, and that made her start crying. All in all, the movie is great, and the first part was strong and the ending was satisfying. The middle part I can't say much about in one go because there were good parts in it, but I also felt like it dragged just a slight bit. I absolutely love the strong start in the early twist of Norman's grandmother being dead, and seeing how the neighborhood sees him and then shifts to Norman's POV, which is ironically more lively than what the others see. It got me hooked. The middle part where he starts dealing with the book and the corpse of his uncle, that scene dragged on very much. The slapstick comedy of him trying to pry the book from his uncle's hands felt a bit longer than needed. It was entertaining for the first few pulls, but it goes on. It just goes on too long. Same thoughts for the car scene. It didn't drag the movie down for me, mind you, but it was my least favorite part of it, if any, since I do like and admire the movie for what it is as a whole. The comedy was a hit or miss. There was a lot of misses, but when it hits, oh, was it great. One of my favorites was when Neil was being called by Courtney and he slowly looks out and just stares. It was adorable. Or this scene where everything seemed grim and serious and Norman was lost, but his big sis gives him a pep talk saying their school didn't give up, and instantly Norman says, I thought we did. And the slap back from Courtney instantly saying, yeah, we did. We did. Yeah, I kinda like that little sibling interaction even in the midst of a serious moment, especially since the music really stopped for that second. I found it really funny.
But nothing, you listen to me, Buster. We didn't turn away when Dale Ridge High was slaughtering our volleyball team, did we?
I thought we did.
No, we didn't. I have cheered the uncheerable, Norman.
Now, before we dive in what I think of the animation, characters, and voice acting, I'd like to introduce another guest. Say hello to Sierra Mao, a good friend of mine who will share her thoughts on Paranorman. Take it away, Sierra.
Thank you so much to Roz for having me. I'm excited to be able to share my thoughts with her as well as you guys. She's a wonderful friend and phenomenal content creator, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be a part of one of her reviews and to collaborate with someone I respect so much. As you were told just 5 seconds ago, I'm Sierra Mao. I do a lot of voice acting, singing, and streaming on YouTube and Twitch. I'm a VTuber and my main content consists of ASMR, comic dubs, and streaming various games. Let me start off by saying that I had absolutely no prior knowledge of Paranorman until Roz invited me to collaborate on this review. I've watched a couple stop-motion films in the past, like Coraline, but I've never heard of Paranorman. I didn't even read the synopsis when I started watching the film, and and I did not expect it to be an I see dead people kind of movie, except stop motion and less scary. That said, the overall story and moral felt very solid in my opinion. There were a couple of plot points and issues that I felt were there to extend the movie, and I think they could have been cut out or at least shortened. For example, the zombies talking to Norman. Okay, I'm not sure if I missed something, which is definitely possible with my ADHD, but why didn't you guys say anything within the first 20 to 30 minutes of waking up from your nap? I guess the argument for the extended chase and following scenes existing was to illustrate the persecution they faced and how that was their true curse. And that's fine, but from a logical standpoint, I have to wonder, why didn't they even try to talk to Norman? They knew that it was the job of someone to read a story to her every year, and they heard Norman try to do that at their grave. And sounded like they were saying things then, but shouldn't Norman have been able to understand them since he can understand dead people? Is this like speaking in tongues or something? Am I missing something? Okay, it's fine, it's whatever. On to the next point. Another thing that also felt kind of off was how Norman actually got roped into saving the town. He didn't seem particularly motivated, and it felt like he was doing it just because he was told the only person who can speak to ghosts now is him, and he's the only one who can do it, which I mean, I guess it worked, so joke's on me, but I felt like a better, more natural and in-character method of motivating Norman would have been appealing to his compassion. They could have done this by showing more flashbacks of Agatha, rather than an old dude dying and telling him to do a job. They could have shown her speaking to ghosts and getting shunned for it, and it would have made me a lot more invested in Norman, knowing that he was empathizing with her from the get-go, and this entire journey felt more personal to him. All of the bullying and persecution that he faced, he knew someone else was experiencing that too. Like, yes, we know he's the only one who can talk to dead people, and he knows it, and that's why he's doing this. But the emotional impact from him being invested in Agatha, this person that he's only seen in flashbacks, would have been much more enjoyable for me as a viewer personally. The overall writing and dialogue was actually really enjoyable. None of the jokes felt forced or awkward in terms of their content, and I found myself laughing at quite a few of them. I initially assumed that this was a children's movie, but there was definitely a bit of dark humor woven in that I do not feel suits an audience under 10 to 13, coupled with the actual plot, like a certain joke about cops, for example. It's surprising how dark the film can be. One of the most horrifying things in this movie is that the only difference between Agatha and Norman is the time in which they were born. Someone in the mob, a police officer mind you, suggests that they hang and burn Norman, another child. It shows how this attitude of ignorance and fear of the unknown is something that's constantly present, regardless of what century it is. I can't say how appropriate this movie is for children under 10, but I can say adults will definitely enjoy this. I can confirm, as an adult. In terms of the cinematography and animation, everything was really smooth for the most part, and the detail is gorgeous, and any clunky parts are just the charm of stop motion. Take this with a grain of salt, however, since I've been scared of my own shadow before. There is some scary imagery of the witch and some genuinely creepy moments in the atmosphere that kind of took me off guard. They did a really good job with the camera angles, and I got literal chills when we zoomed in on Norman's ear and heard her whisper. Moving on to characters, I personally found Neil to be the most enjoyable character, along with his brother Mitch. Neil is absolutely adorable, and Mitch is this fun himbo with an unexpected punchline. Neil is a character I initially thought would have really dorky and forced children's humor for dialogue, but he ended up saying some really funny things and being pretty unique. Norman's mom was kind of refreshing too, because the mom is usually portrayed as supportive in movies like this, but not quite like Norman's mom. She's very supportive mostly because she loves her son, and she isn't usually outright dismissive of what Norman says he sees, and actually tries to make Norman's father come around and see his perspective. It's also implied that she believes in some supernatural things herself. The dad is a typical dad where he reluctantly comes around at the end and ends up trying to understand Norman in his own awkward dad way. His sister is pretty cliche too, but it's still wholesome to see her stand up for him nonetheless. I brought up how Norman is the person that we get to know the best and the least simultaneously earlier, and I think it's because we get to know Norman's likes, his position in the social hierarchy, his ability to see the dead person sitting beside you as we speak, as well as his acceptance of himself in the end. But that's it. We don't actually have that many reasons to like Norman or get to know a likable side of him in a lighthearted way. We're supposed to empathize with Norman because he's the main character, and we see his struggle. But in terms of Norman's personality, he feels pretty forgettable to me personally. He doesn't actually show much personality aside from becoming a Giga Chad with character development and accepting himself and his gift at the end of the film. And while character development is obviously a huge part of one's personality, and we do see Norman conversing with ghosts as a regular kid in the film, the instances of him being stereotypically likable don't really stand out that much. That said, I guess you could say that while I found Norman forgettable, this was also very realistic. The bullying and isolation that Norman is shown to experience help to show how he's being pushed down by the world around him, and illustrates how we can forget about the good and likable parts of people because they no longer have the energy or freedom to show them. As for the voice acting, it was overall fantastic in this film. The cast all suit their characters very well, and the emotions expressed are generally spot on. There are a couple awkward instances where I feel like Norman's voice actor is a little lacking in energy, especially during emotional scenes, and it kicks out some of the emotional investment I had in what he was saying. I'm sorry, but if you're going to give me a dramatic speech after not getting mad the entire film, I'm going to expect you to explode with a lot more emotion. That said, this is my personal opinion though. I can see on the flip side how an outburst like that suited someone as reclusive as Norman. Overall, I enjoyed the movie a lot more than I expected, and the moral of the story regarding people being scared of the unknown and their own ignorance was quite a good one, coupled with not judging a book by its cover.
Well, thank you, Sierra, for the insight. Now we can talk about the animation. I've mentioned at the start that the animation studio that made this movie is Laika, and honestly, I may be biased, but Laika Studios always put out good movies and enticing cinematography. I love stop-motion animation, and I think if you want to have a creepy or dark vibe for your movie, stop-motion is always a good choice of animation style because of its uncanny movement. Stop-motion or claymation is very, very time-consuming with multiple assets of faces, expressions, outfits, and models to use for the character, as well as being extra careful not to move anything or else all previous footage would be wasted. Learned that the hard way when I first watched Spencer from iCarly making his alien burrito film.
Check out this dude.
No, don't touch that!
Okay, Mr. Space Hamster.
Oh my God! My movie is ruined! I have to start all over again, and my deadline's in less than 24 hours!
Look, its arm came off.
Ha! Yeah! Why didn't you stay for dinner and rip my heart out?
I really don't have any complaints about the animation of this movie. Even the character designs are great. The over-exaggerated features of each character is charming. Like how Mitch is a jock so he has really big muscles, and how Courtney has wide hips and a large ponytail, and Norman and Courtney's mother have this big forehead, and how Alvin looks gross. I like when the movies don't go for cute, pretty, marketable designs on characters. They were not scared to make exaggerated proportions, deformed body structures, and elongated faces to give this cartoonish but fascinating designs that would make you feel uneasy even just for a teeny tiny bit. When it comes to the characters, I'd only say a few were handled well and some were just either not utilized, overstayed their welcome, or just changed halfway through the movie. Let's start with the first one, which is Norman, Maggie, Courtney, and Mitch. Norman and Maggie are of course more fleshed out and given more time for the audience to get to know them, since they are very similar and they seem like a foil for each other, having both misunderstood by the fear of people around them, with one of them facing a tragedy that the other could have easily ended up in if it weren't for the solution for the movie. Courtney and Mitch are both side characters, and even when they don't have much screen time, each interaction shows their character, with how Courtney is a cheerleader, always sassy and flirtatious, but takes responsibility, which in the first half we think is because she doesn't want to get in trouble with her parents, and that's part of it, but later on you'd realize she really does care for her brother. Also, she's voiced by Anna Kendrick, who absolutely did an amazing job in her voice acting. Everyone did great, but her performance was just a little bit up there more. And then we have Mitch, who admittedly has even less time to shine than Courtney, but they do give us a glimpse of his personality and hobbies, such as interest in cars, enthusiasm for sports, as shown when he was ecstatic about his strong kick rather than the fact that he just encountered a zombie, as well as him being helpful and looking out for others around him. I'd also like to point out that both of these characters were being built up in the very beginning of the movie for the punchline at the end, which Courtney being so flirtatious and Mitch having no reaction to it at all, which could be either he accepts her flirting or didn't take it as flirting at all, which we learned by the end is the latter. And can I just say that you can tell they weren't pandering when they included Mitch, unlike some characters where their whole personality is to be gay. Mitch is a character that happens to be gay. There were no stereotypes, it's the opposite even. Mitch throughout the movie was a stereotypical jock character who is played in media someone who exuberates machismo or the tough guy, when he isn't the toxic male character at all. Which, speaking of Neil, is one of the characters where his character sort of changed halfway. In the first half of the movie, he was this cute, adorable kid who doesn't care what other people think of him and does what he likes, hence why he hangs out with Norman without judging or fearing him like the other people do. And because of that character of his, he was really endearing and funny at times when he showed bravery for just a tiny little child. But then in the latter half, he just got demoted to being a dumb kid and says quips that are honestly not funny at all.
Yes! Book number 1 finished. That is right, 26 pages. Oh yeah.
Then we have the character who overstayed their welcome, and that character is Alvin. He is needed in the first half of the movie to show how people misunderstand Norman. And I do like how every time he bullies Norman, he looks to his peers every time, showing how, like every bully, he's just doing things to get people's approval. And he's showing that he's better than everyone. And when Alvin and Norman first encountered the zombies, it was very satisfying to see how helpless he is when Norman, the kid he always bullies, was the one carrying his weight and getting them out of the situation. But after that, he really didn't need to be in the group. He just sits there flirting with Courtney in an awkward way that I would love to do without. You can also argue that they needed him to pick the lock to get into the library, but that could be easily fixed with Mitch busting down the door, or Courtney being the one to pick a lock with a hairpin that I'm sure as hell she's carrying around. So, yeah. I really didn't see a use for Alvin other than the first half of the movie. Special mention to the theater teacher. She really riled up the crowd in a flamboyant, theatrical way in the name of theater. And after the people were called out to be immature by the kids, she just says, with the utmost audacity of a Karen that just blew up 30 Walmarts, that she was just inhabiting the role. What a performer, right? Anyway, I feel like the only part that matched the quality of the opening sequence was the climax of the movie, specifically the calm, serene moment with Aggie, and the whole movie felt a bit off. Not by much, but it didn't drag the movie down for me. I really enjoyed this movie, and I feel like if they remove more of the slapstick comedy, I wouldn't feel like it dragged too long, because I do like the characters and the story and the world they set up. So if you haven't watched it for yourself, go do so, because even if you know the story and the punchlines, it still has a little impact that definitely hit you at least once while watching. It's a great movie that deserves all the awards and nominations it's got. Now, speaking of deserve, let me tell you a little something about today's sponsor. Tokyo Treats and Sakura Co. are both subscription services that deliver exclusive snacks to your doorstep. If you want modern Japanese snacks, I suggest you go for Tokyo Treats, and if you like a more traditional taste of Japanese goodies, Sakura Co. is the one for you. Tokyo Treats' theme for this month is Spooktacular Snacking, filled with Halloween special treats like the sweet potato Kit Kats and the Tokyo Layer Loaf, which I took a bite out of and it tastes so good, let me tell you. For Sakura Co., they have the Ibaraki Harvest Box. Collaborating with the local government, Sakura Co. presents a range of Ibaraki's culinary treats, such as the Ibaraki Chestnut Karinto and the Benizuma Sweet Potato Cake. I tried the strawberry tart that is so adorable and sweet, and I also tried the Izatsuzumi Manju that is filled with bean paste, and it's just a great snack that fills you up quick. Use this promo code flashed on the screen to get $5 off of your first purchase for Tokyo Treats or Sakura Co. Or you can check the links down in the description for it. Enjoy your exclusive Japanese snacking experience. Thanks again, Tokyo Treats and Sakura Co. for sponsoring this video. Big thanks to my patrons. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Let me give some shoutouts to my patrons on the Butternut and Dill Pickles tier. Thanks a bunch Cross, Christian V, Kyle, Jacob K, Piranet, and F Ignite. I'll be reviewing Dragon Hunters for the next review as suggested by my patron Piranet, and right after is a foxtail from 08 requested by Jacob K. Thanks so much for watching. So yeah.